You are standing in a pasture in Holmes County, Ohio, watching 30 dairy cows move from one section of grass to another. They have been doing this same movement every single day for the last 6 months. Same pattern, same timing, same rotation, and in that entire 6 months, not a single bag of commercial feed has been purchased for these animals. Not one. The cows are healthy. The milk production is high, the calves are growing at normal rates, and the family that owns this herd has never once paid a feed bill in their lives. What you are about to learn is the exact grazing system the Amish have used for over 200 years to feed cattle, sheep, goats, chickens, and pigs without buying a single pound of commercial feed. This is not about having more land. This is not about lucky soil. This is about a rotation system that turns grass into meat and milk, while making the pasture richer every single year. And when I show you what happened in 1972 when the USDA tried to convince Amish farmers to adopt the modern grain feeding model, you will understand why they refused and why their refusal saved them from a trap that has bankrupted thousands of conventional farms. The average American dairy farmer spends $4,000 to $6,000 per cow per year on purchased feed. Corn silage, soybean meal, protein supplements, mineral blocks, hay when pasture is not available. Over a 30-cow herd, that is $120,000 to $180,000 every single year, over 10 years, $1.2 to $1.8 million. The Amish dairy farmer in Holmes County spends zero. Not because the cows eat less, because the pasture produces everything the animals need, and the pasture is managed in a way that makes it produce more every year instead of less. The difference is not genetics, it is not climate, it is rotation. And once you understand how rotation works, the entire commercial livestock feed industry starts to look like an expensive solution to a problem that never needed to exist. Let me show you the core system, because the simplicity of it will make you question everything you have been taught about raising animals. The pasture is divided into sections called paddocks. Each paddock is roughly 1 to 2 acres depending on herd size and grass growth rate. The cows are moved to a fresh paddock every single day. They graze that section for 24 hours, and then they move to the next one. By the time they return to the first paddock, 30 to 45 days have passed. The grass has regrown, the manure has broken down into the soil, and the cycle repeats. That is the entire system. Move the animals daily, let the grass rest for 30 to 45 days, repeat forever. But here is what that simple rotation does that continuous grazing or purchased feed can never replicate. When cows graze a pasture continuously, they eat their favorite plants down to the ground and ignore the ones they do not like. The desirable grasses disappear, the weeds take over, the pasture degrades. Within a few years, the land can barely support half the animals it started with. The farmer buys hay, then grain, then more grain. The animals become dependent on purchased feed, and the land becomes dependent on chemical fertilizer to produce anything at all. When cows graze in a rotation, they eat everything in the paddock before they move. The grass they like, the grass they tolerate, the clovers, the forbs. They do not have time to be selective because they are only there for one day. That grazing pressure is intense but brief. The plants are cut down evenly, and then they are left alone to recover. And here is the critical part. Grass grows fastest when it is grazed at the right height and then given time to rest. If you let grass grow too tall, it puts energy into seed production instead of leaf growth. If you graze it too short, you damage the root system and slow recovery. If you graze it at the optimal height, between 6 and 10 inches depending on species, and then leave it alone for 30 to 45 days, it regrows faster and thicker than it did before. The University of Missouri conducted long-term studies on rotational grazing from 1995 to 2010 and published results that the livestock feed industry has never wanted widely known. Rotationally grazed pastures produced 40 to 60% more forage per acre than continuously grazed pastures. The soil organic matter increased by an average of 1.5% over 10 years in rotational systems, while continuously grazed pastures showed no improvement or slight decline. And the most important finding for anyone trying to eliminate feed costs, rotationally grazed cattle required 0 supplemental grain to maintain body condition and milk production during the growing season. 0. The grass alone provided everything: protein, energy, minerals, vitamins. As long as the rotation was managed correctly, the animals performed as well as grain-fed animals without a single purchased input. Now let me tell you what happened when the USDA tried to change that system in the 1970s. In 1972, the United States Department of Agriculture launched a nationwide program to increase milk production through what they called improved feeding practices. The recommendation was simple: move cattle off pasture, house them in confinement barns. Feed them a high-energy ration based on corn and soybean meal. The promised result was higher milk production per cow. And the promise was real. A cow fed high-grain rations in a confinement system produces more milk than a cow on grass, 15 to 25% more depending on the ration. USDA extension agents visited Amish farms across Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana with this message. The agents brought charts, they brought feed cost projections, they brought financing options for building confinement barns. The Amish farmers listened politely, then they said no. Not because they did not understand the math, because they understood something the USDA agents did not. The increased milk production came at a cost that did not show up on the feed efficiency charts. Grain-fed cows have higher rates of acidosis, a digestive disorder caused by too much starch in the diet. They have higher rates of lameness from standing on concrete instead of pasture. They have higher rates of mastitis, a udder infection linked to confinement stress. They require more veterinary intervention, more antibiotics, more hoof trimming, more reproductive assistance. And when grain prices spiked, which they did in 1973, 1980, 1996, 2008, and 2012, the farmers who had adopted confinement feeding saw their profit margins disappear overnight. The Amish farmers who stayed on rotational grazing saw no change in their costs. The grass still grew, the cows still grazed, the milk still sold. Their expenses did not fluctuate with commodity markets because they were not buying commodities. By 1985, thousands of conventional dairy farms that had adopted confinement feeding in the 1970s were bankrupt or near bankruptcy. The debt from building the barns, combined with volatile feed prices and declining milk prices, created a financial trap that no amount of production efficiency could solve. The Amish farms that refused the USDA recommendation were still operating. Many are still operating today. Same families, same land, same rotation. Now let me walk you through exactly how an Amish rotational grazing system works in practice, because if you have livestock or you are thinking about getting livestock, this is information you can implement immediately. The pasture is divided into 30 to 45 paddocks using temporary electric fencing, polywire or polytape strung on step-in posts. The fencing is cheap, mobile, and easy to move. You do not need permanent infrastructure. You need a reel of wire, 50 posts, and a solar-powered fence charger that costs less than $100. Each paddock is sized so the herd can graze it in one day without overgrazing. For 30 cows, that is typically 1 to 2 acres per paddock, depending on grass growth rate and season. In spring, when growth is fast, paddocks can be smaller. In late summer, when growth slows, paddocks need to be larger. Every morning, the farmer moves the fence to open a fresh paddock. The cows walk in and start grazing. The fence behind them is moved to close off the paddock they just left. Total time to move the fence is 10 to 15 minutes. That is the only daily labor requirement. No feed mixing, no grain delivery, no equipment maintenance. Move the fence and walk away. The cows graze for 24 hours. They eat the grass down to 3 to 4 inches, which is the optimal grazing height. Any shorter, and you risk damaging the plant. Any taller, and you are wasting forage. Then they move to the next paddock. The grazed paddock is left to rest for 30 to 45 days, depending on season. During that rest period, several things happen that purchased feed can never replicate. The grass regrows from the energy stored in its roots. The manure deposited by the cows breaks down and releases nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium back into the soil. Earthworms and soil microorganisms multiply. In the nutrient-rich environment, the soil structure improves, water infiltration increases, and the pasture becomes more productive than it was before the cows grazed it. This is the opposite of mining. This is building. Every grazing cycle adds fertility instead of depleting it. Every rotation makes the land more valuable instead of less. The Amish farmer is not extracting wealth from the soil, he is generating wealth with the soil, and the cows are the tool that makes it happen. Now here is the piece that most rotational grazing guides do not emphasize enough. The system works because of the rest period, not just the grazing. If you move animals daily but do not give the paddocks enough time to recover, you are just doing continuous grazing in a more complicated way. The plants need time to rebuild their root systems. The soil biology needs time to process the manure. 30 days minimum, 45 days is better. That rest period is non-negotiable. It is the entire reason the system produces more forage year after year instead of degrading. During the growing season, April through October in temperate climates, the cows live entirely on rotational pasture. No grain, no hay, no purchased supplements, just grass, clover, and whatever forbs are growing in the mix. In winter, when the grass stops growing, the Amish switch to stored forage, hay cut from the same pastures in late spring and early summer when growth exceeds what the herd can graze. That hay was grown without synthetic fertilizer because the pasture has been building its own fertility through the grazing rotation. Cost to produce that hay is labor and equipment time, no purchased inputs. Some Amish farms also use a technique called stockpiled forage. In late summer, they set aside several paddocks and let the grass grow tall without grazing. That tall grass goes dormant in fall but remains standing and nutritious through winter. The cows graze it in place, even through snow. It is standing hay that requires no harvest, no storage, and no feeding equipment. Zero cost, zero waste. The system also integrates chickens. After the cows move out of a paddock, chickens move in 3 to 5 days later. The chickens scratch through the cow manure, eat fly larvae, spread the manure evenly, and sanitize the paddock while adding their own high nitrogen droppings. Then the chickens move to the next paddock behind the cows. The chickens are fed entirely on pasture insects, grass seeds, and scattered grain from the manure, no purchased chicken feed. The eggs are a product. The manure distribution is a service. The parasite control is a bonus. One species following another in rotation creates a system where waste from one becomes food for another, and every animal contributes to pasture fertility instead of degrading it. Now let me give you the cost comparison that the feed industry does not want you to see. A conventional dairy farmer feeding 30 cows on a confinement ration spends approximately $5,000 per cow per year on feed. 30 cows, $150,000 annually. Over 10 years, $1.5 million. Over 30 years, $4.5 million. All of that money flows out of the farm and into the hands of feed mills, grain elevators, and commodity traders. None of it builds soil, none of it improves the land. All of it creates dependency. The Amish farmer running a rotational grazing system spends zero on purchased feed during the growing season and minimal cost on winter hay that he grows himself. Over 30 years, the savings compared to the confinement system is over $4 million. That is not a small difference. That is generational wealth. That is the difference between owning your farm free and clear versus being trapped in debt to feed companies and banks. And that $4 million does not account for the avoided costs of veterinary care, antibiotics, hoof trimming, and reproductive interventions that are far more common in confinement systems than in pasture-based systems. But the industry built around livestock feed does not want you doing this math. The commercial livestock feed industry in the United States generates over $50 billion in annual revenue. That number depends entirely on farmers believing that animals cannot thrive without purchased grain. If rotational grazing became the standard practice, feed sales would collapse. Equipment manufacturers would lose customers, grain traders would lose volume. Veterinary pharmaceutical companies would lose demand. The entire supply chain depends on continuous dependency. And dependency is not a side effect of modern livestock farming. Dependency is the design. The industry does not sell feed, it sells a system that requires feed. And once you are inside that system, the costs never stop. The Amish stayed outside that system. They never adopted confinement feeding. They never adopted grain dependency. They never adopted the financial model that requires borrowing money to buy feed, to produce milk, to pay back the loan, to buy more feed. They stayed with rotation, and rotation made them independent. I want you to think about what this means in practical terms for anyone raising animals. You do not need a feed store. You do not need a grain contract. You do not need a mixer wagon or a feed bunk or a confinement barn. You need grass, temporary fencing, and the discipline to move animals daily. The grass is already there. The fencing costs less than $500 to start. The discipline is free. Everything else is profit. If you are raising cattle, sheep, goats, or even pigs, rotational grazing eliminates the single largest operating cost in livestock production. If you are considering getting into livestock, rotational grazing makes it financially possible to start small without going into debt for feed infrastructure. And if you are already feeding grain and watching your costs increase every year while your margins shrink, rotational grazing is the exit door from that trap. The Amish figured this out 200 years ago. The system has not changed because it does not need to change. Grass grows, animals eat, soil improves, wealth builds, no purchased inputs, no dependency, no vulnerability to commodity price swings. That is not a farming method. That is a financial survival strategy that works. I want to know one thing from you. If you could eliminate your livestock feed bill completely and improve your pasture at the same time, what would stop you from starting rotational grazing tomorrow? Leave that answer in the comments because I want to know what barriers people